All right, welcome. Unit 5. Let's review agriculture and rural land use patterns and processes. There are 12 topics for Unit 5. The essential knowledge and learning objectives are terms, concepts, statements that you should be fairly familiar with by the time that we go through each of the topics. Agriculture is the purposeful cultivation of plants or raising of animals. It is intentional. The most favorable land for growing crops is in temperate climates with good soil, good precipitation, relatively low elevation, um, and anywhere near the equator is going to be pretty good for growing crops year round. Remember, climate is one of the most important factors for what we can grow and where we can grow it. Climate is long-term weather patterns. Weather is what's happening today. We have a snow day, it's going to snow today, right? Climate is the average over the long run. There are some climatic regions that we should be familiar with. One is tropical. Tropical is in this red area here. Warm temperatures year round. Like I said, good for growing crops year round. These are in typically like rain foresty types of areas. Mediterranean climate is one that we should most definitely be familiar with. We'll see Mediterranean climates, obviously around the Mediterranean in Australia, South Africa, Chile, and on the West Coast in California. Really, really good for growing olives and grapes. Intensive farming practices. Okay, we need to be able to differentiate between intensive and extensive. Intensive and extensive. I always teach my students intensive, hard work. Just think about an intense workout that you've done in your life. That's intensive. Now we can think about it intensive labor, that would be hard work, or intensive capital with lots of money. Intensive capital would be intensive commercial. We're going to make a profit and be able to sell the things that we are growing or the animals that we're raising. Intensive subsistence is typically going to be some real hard labor, animal intensive, growing just enough food to feed our families or a really small group. With intensive, it's going to be higher levels of inputs per the amount of land that we're using. One such intensive form of agriculture is plantation agriculture. This is typically going to happen in lesser developed countries, LDCs, or in periphery or semi-periphery countries. If we're thinking about Wallerstein's world systems theory, it's typically going to be owned by American or European multinational corporations, and they're going to grow crops for export. We call those cash crops. Some examples of cash crops would be cotton, tobacco, tea, coffee, sugar, bananas, palm oil, and rubber. Market gardening, fruits and vegetables, fruits and vegetables, fruits and vegetables. Fruits and vegetables are perishable. So where do we need to grow our fruits and vegetables? Close to markets, close to large cities. Now, in today's modern world, and if we apply this to Von Thünen, not as applicable today with refrigerated trucks, canning, freezing, but still, for the most part, it still kind of fits. We need to get our fruits and vegetables to our markets as quick as possible. Mixed crop and livestock, it's in the name. You're going to grow the crop to feed to the livestock. The livestock is going to be the thing that the farmer grows, the thing that the farmer makes their money off of. These are just two maps from the Nat Geo book. Extensive farming practices, opposite of intensive, fewer inputs of labor and or capital per the amount of land. This is typically going to be done in climates that are too dry or too cold, where it's not conducive for the growing of crops. So we'll raise animals instead. Um, we'll get into some examples here, but like commercial ranching, nomadic herding, shifting cultivation as well. Shifting cultivation, it's kind of in the name as well. We're going to shift what we're growing, right? Really, really good for multi-cropping. We'll be able to grow multiple things within a season, leave a land fallow or open to regenerate. This is typically going to be done in lesser developed countries in the tropics. We would categorize this as extensive subsistence. Slash and burn is a type of shifting cultivation. Slash the shrubbery, slash the bushes, slash the trees, slash the rainforest, and then burn it down. This will provide nutrients to the soil, but it only lasts for about a year, 2 years, 3 years, and then the process needs to start over again. There's some major drawbacks to this. One such example would be deforestation. Nomadic herding, also called pastoral nomadism. Animals are going to move around and graze the land. The animals and people will move around seasonally. Uh, we can bring this back to Unit 2. Some nomads engage in transhumance, so they will take their animals to higher lands in the summer and then lower lands in the winter. All right, but we'll typically practice this type of agriculture where it's like too cold or too dry. So this would be very common in Northern Africa and in Southwest Asia and in Mongolia. Livestock ranching would be an example of extensive commercial agriculture. This is something we'd see out west in the US or in Texas, big time down in Brazil and Uruguay and Argentina. We're going to raise animals, in this case, in the picture, cattle, for export. In contrast to livestock ranching would be CAFOs and feedlots. These are just two pictures from the AMSCO book that just lay it all out there. Super easy, super simple in the chart. So if you need to pause this, jot down some notes about the different types of agriculture, the climates that they exist in, and where you might find it. And then on the right side there, you got the different examples of intensive versus extensive, and then subsistence and commercial. Commercial for profit, subsistence just for small group or your family. All right, topic 2, settlement patterns and survey methods. I try and simplify this one as easy as possible. We need to know meets and bounds, we need to know township and range, and we need to know the long lot survey system. For meets and bounds, clustered, irregular settlements, township and range, dispersed, grid, linear, long lot system, linear, and rectilinear as well. Meets and bounds, Great Britain, how they would do this um, to outline somebody's boundaries. They'd use that tree over to that hill, over to that river, over to that fence, and that was somebody's land ownership. It created unusual, irregular shapes, but created clustered patterns. This was instituted by Great Britain, so this would be something that you'd see out east in the East Coast of the United States. Township and range system was developed by Thomas Jefferson in the 1780s, and it was a way to encourage people to move west of the Mississippi. People got 640-acre plots of land in a grid. Anytime you're in a plane, you're heading out west, you look down, you look down, you'll see a grid patterns. So if you're ever on that plane and you want to bore somebody with your knowledge about the township and range system and why we have grids on the ground, there you go. Give it to them. But it led to a dispersed settlement because if you think about 640 acres, you'd get that plot of land and then everybody was spread out. Long lot system was instituted by the French. So this would be commonly seen in along the Mississippi, but in particular in Louisiana. It created linear systems where everybody had equal access to a river or a road, could even be like a train or something like that. So it gave everybody equal access to that transportation or that trade route, and it led to linear or rectilinear patterns. Topic 3, agricultural origins and diffusions. For this topic, we need to know where farming began and then how it spread. And the big thing that led to the spread of different plants, animals, peoples, and diseases would be the Columbian Exchange. Agricultural hearth. Hearth is home. Hearth is home. Hearth is home. So agricultural hearths is where agriculture began. One thing you should know and understand is that our agricultural hearths developed independent from one another. Our first agricultural revolution, also called the Neolithic Revolution, happened about 10 to 12,000 years ago, right? Humans were nomadic, moving around in small groups, hunting animals, picking berries, right? About 10 to 12,000 years ago, humans started to farm, which eventually led to the creation of permanent settlements where people would create their homes, their villages, their civilizations around their farms. As the map here shows, these are our different agricultural hearths. Different crops and animals originate in these different hearths. Some of the ones I just try and get my students to remember is Central America, corn, in the Andes, potatoes, tomatoes, in Africa, coffee, in the Fertile Crescent, it's known as the breadbasket, wheat. Fertile Crescent, wheat. Indus River Valley, also wheat, but nothing really sticks out to me too much there in terms of a crop that like students should know that originated in the Indus River. And then in Southeast Asia and in North Central China, rice. Another one in Southeast Asia, bananas. Bananas. That's a question on the progress check, is about bananas and where it started and how then it came over to Central America. Some of the early diffusions of agriculture and the domestication of animals. Again, this map is from the National Geographic book. Some of the different animals where they were domesticated first. Columbian Exchange. We got to know Columbian Exchange. So at first, agriculture, when it first began, diffused by contagious diffusion and by movement of people trading things close by. That all changes post 1492. It's known as the Columbian Exchange because it began after 1492, after Columbus landed in the Americas. What I always tell my students is that Europe, Africa, Asia are living in isolation to North America, South America. They're living in isolation from one another, right? The hemispheres are not connected. Once Columbus sails across the Atlantic Ocean, it's going to lead to the global exchange of people, plants, animals, and diseases. Then I want to get my students to know, what are the negatives? People, slavery. Millions of people are shipped across the Atlantic Ocean as slaves. Diseases, smallpox, measles, mumps, things that natives in North and South America were not immune to, will be exposed to, and they will die in huge, huge numbers. Those are the negatives. Positives, global transfer of different plants and foods. It's going to lead to richer diets, more nutritious diets, more food availability, which is going to lead to life expectancy eventually going up and a population boom post-Columbian Exchange worldwide. Second agricultural revolution. I don't know where my essential knowledge went, But second agricultural revolution is the fourth topic in Unit 5. This all started around the 1700s, mid 1700s in Great Britain. It coincides with the Industrial Revolution. It coincides with a medical revolution. It coincides with stage two of the demographic transition model. This is when Thomas Malthus is making his statement that population was going way up in comparison to food supply. This is all about mechanization and new machinery that will make farming more efficient, that will create higher yields, that will then result in people moving to cities looking for jobs, and they're going to take those jobs in factories. And that's why our next unit is urbanization. One of the things that's going to lead to increased yields is the enclosure system. I always tell my students, test day, let's say that we take the average score in the class and everybody will get the average. How hard are you going to work? Not so hard, right? Before that, that was kind of like what land was like in Great Britain. It was kind of communal ownership. People just kind of worked together, helping each other out. They shared in the food that they grew. If you own the land yourself, if you get your own grade on the test, I guarantee that you're going to work harder, right? It's my land now. I've got to maximize my yield. This is based on survival for me and my family. So the enclosure method led to increased yields, but then it also pushed farmers off the land and it helped contribute to the Industrial Revolution. New technologies, I don't think it's super important to know specifically some of the new technologies. Just know that there were new technologies that made farming more efficient. And when farming is more efficient, we can produce more food. And if we can produce more food and have surpluses, not as many people are needed to work. And so people are going to go out and find jobs elsewhere. Green Revolution, topic 5.5. For this one, we have to differentiate between high yield seeds, seed hybridization, which is what Norman Borlaug was doing, and genetic modification of seeds in a lab. That's the thing that I try and get my students to understand and differentiate between. This is all part of the third agricultural revolution. This is basically like the second agricultural revolution, but on steroids. All right. So in the second ag rev, we're doing things all natural. All right. It's machines, but it's human powered. Now we've got the machinery doing the work on its own, right? Diesel powered. It is machines, chemical usage, water usage on steroids. And when we're on steroids, we can produce way more food. All right. And that's what's going to happen during the third agricultural revolution. Some might say that we're in a fourth agricultural revolution where we now have drones, we have robots, we have automated uh, tractors and machinery and GPS. And it is pretty cool what farmers are able to do and what they're using today. Green Revolution is part of the third agricultural revolution. Norman Borlaug is our guy here. He will develop a disease-resistant strain of wheat. He is going to help feed populations in periphery countries, in particular in Mexico and in India. He's going to revolutionize the way that people will farm there. There are positives that come with this, and there are negatives that come with this. Here we go. So we can feed way more people. We can feed way more people the way that Norman Borlaug was doing things and with GMOs. We can feed the world, but you need the machinery, you need water, and you need chemical usage. And as you probably understand or have been taught, those things come with downsides and negatives. We also have a loss of biodiversity and a decline in soil fertility as we have done more and more monocropping, just growing one crop year after year after year, or one crop seasonally. Topic 5.6 is about agricultural production regions. We're going to touch upon some of the different types of agriculture that we learned on in 5.1, and we're also going to apply this to the bid rent theory. So in the Nat Geo book, it gives this map and the land elevations of the world. And this would be something that you can pause, you can take a look at the map, and you can answer the prompts to the left. Subsistence agriculture, growing just enough food to feed or raise, just enough food to feed a family or a really, really small group. This is done in lesser developed regions of the world. One thing I tell my students is this isn't necessarily done by choice, right? They just lack the advanced technology that farmers have in the United States, right? This is not necessarily by choice, right? Who wouldn't want to produce enough food to then sell for profit? So we're going to see this in lesser developed countries that lack the technology and the machinery and the capital to produce enough food to sell. On the opposite end of the spectrum is commercial agriculture. This is going to be capital intensive. We're going to grow enough crops to sell and to commercialize and to make a profit. We're going to see this in more developed countries. As we see this type of agriculture, the percent of people who are engaged in agriculture or in primary economic activities goes down. When we have higher percentages of people who are in agriculture, that typically means it's going to be more subsistence based with older tools, older technology, lacking the equipment to grow enough to sell. Unfortunately, in this type of agriculture, we see monocropping and monoculture. And I just think, we're just going to grow one crop. Just no, mono, one crop. Bid rent theory. Okay, so we can use bid rent theory to understand intensive versus extensive and what farmers will grow in proximity to a market or to the city. All right, so land value is higher closest to the city. So what do we need to do? We need to farm more intensively. What are the types of things that require intensive farming? Dairy and fruits and vegetables. So it's going to be dairy and market gardening because those products will spoil. Land values will then be higher, and so the plots of land will be smaller. As we move away from the city, we'll see more extensive agriculture. Land values will be cheaper, and there will be more of it available. That's it. That's the gist. Eventually, you'll see we can apply the bid rent theory to the von Thünen model. Okay, so agricultural practices are influenced by economic forces. I think that's probably pretty self-explanatory. Where we have subsistence agriculture, connections to global markets are going to be more limited, right? Less capital, less credit. Commercial agriculture, advanced technology. We're going to have large plots of land. I always get my students to think when we're driving down in central and southern Illinois, those farms are huge because those farmers can farm gigantic acreage with the machinery that they have. Agribusiness. All right. I just tell my students this is big business of farming. Just think big business of farming. So if we're in the big business of farming, what is it that we have? What is it that we can do? We have machines. We've got, probably chemical usage. We've got huge acreage of land. We've got the money and capital that we can control the production, okay, the growing of the food, the processing, turning it into something else, or the packaging, and we can distribute it. We have the transportation in it as well. If we can control all of those steps in the process, then we can maximize our profits. And if we can do that, it's very, very difficult for a small family farm to compete against an agribusiness. All right, spatial organization of agriculture. What I just finished with in that slide goes right into this slide. We'll also talk about commodity chains and how technology has increased economies of scale and the carrying capacity of the land. All right, family versus corporate farms. So still in the United States, the vast majority of farms are family-owned farms. That's key. That's crucial. The thing is that those numbers are decreasing every single year. So the number of corporate farms are growing and the number of family farms are decreasing. The other thing is, even though the percentage of corporate farms is not great, they own the vast majority of the farmland in the United States. So if you see the screen there, right? So 16% of farms worldwide are larger than 5 acres, but they are 88% of the world's farmland. That's a huge percentage. This is an image from the Nat Geo book. If you want to pause it and take a look at it, observe it, you can. Okay, so impact of large-scale farms. Like I said, agribusinesses can control all the steps in the production and processing of the foods or the animals or whatever type of agriculture that they're engaged in, so they can maximize profits. Second thing is they can produce at an economy of scale that a small family farm can't. Okay, here's how I teach economies of scale. Just think Costco. The more you can produce of something, or the more you can sell in bulk, the lower the cost, right? If you go to Costco, you're going to get a year supply of toilet paper, right? And per unit of toilet paper, the cost is really low because they sell it in bulk. All right, so that's economies of scale. The other example that you could think of is, a fast food chain can sell their food at a pretty cheap cost because they mass produce it. And so that's economies of scale. Commodity chain, I just think supply chains, it's all the steps in the process from the growing of the crop to the processing of it, to the transportation of it, to the selling of it. Just think supply chains. Think back to COVID. We were talking about supply chains all the time and how the supply chain was all interrupted. Commodity chain, same thing. You can apply it to your sectors as well, from primary, secondary to tertiary. Think of that as well. It's all the same thing. Here is the supply chain or the commodity chain going from the inputs to the producing of it, to the processing of it, to the distribution of it, to the selling of it, to then your house. Subsidies are money the government will provide to, in this case, farmers, basically to guarantee a wage, but also it is a way for the government to ensure that our farmers are growing certain types of crops, in particular corn. The government will pay farmers to grow corn, and that's a subsidy. What it does, though, is it keeps food prices relatively low and relatively cheap for the consumer, so that's great. Tariffs. This is a big one right now. Tariffs. Tariffs were an issue in 2018 when it came to agriculture. In this case, in terms of soybeans, tariff is a tax on imports. What I tell my students is if we raise tariffs on certain agricultural products that we sell to other countries or bring in from other countries, that's going to impact farmers in the United States, right? If we raise tariffs on soybeans, that impacts soybean farmers in the US. So one thing with uh, Donald Trump in this presidency is we'll see if some of these tariffs are levied on agricultural products and then how that impacts our farmers and our food supply and the price of food. Von Thünen model. All right, here we go. We can apply von Thünen to the bid rent theory. And I'm going to simplify this and make it as easy as possible for you to understand. Here it is. This is the von Thünen model. Concentric rings. Just know that. It's concentric rings. This was a model created in Germany in the 1800s, all about the market, the city in the center, and then the type of farming that would take place surrounding the city in concentric rings. Again, we can apply the bid rent theory to the von Thünen model. The other thing that we need to factor in here is transportation costs. Okay, transportation costs, land cost, intensity of land use, and perishability. So let's walk you through this. Land costs is going to be highest near the market or the city. Transportation will be at its cheapest because we don't need to go far. We're going to farm more intensively. That's why we're going to see market gardening and dairy because those things are perishable as well. As we move away from the city, we'll see more extensive farming practices. The land will become cheaper, but transportation costs will grow as we move away from the city. Perishability of the things we're going to grow or the animals we're going to raise is minimal. That's von Thünen. That's the bid rent theory. There we go. One thing that we should understand with all of this is how is the model applicable today? And then how is it not? We need to know this as AP Human Geography students with just about every model or theory. How is the model applicable today? Dairy. Our major dairy producing regions of the world are near our biggest cities: California, Wisconsin with Chicago, New York. Market gardening, fruits and vegetables, we still need to get them to our major markets. Those things are still perishable, but we have new technologies today which limit that. Refrigerated containers, refrigerated trucks, canning of goods, freezing of goods. We in the US have access to produce pretty much year round. There is, for the most part, no such thing as out of season. So that is a way in which the von Thünen model is not applicable today. Global system of agriculture, we're going to come back to supply chains. We're going to talk about commodity dependence and how our global food distribution is impacted by governments, infrastructure, and world trade. Global supply chains, same thing as the commodity chain. It's what connects the farmer to the consumer and all the steps in the middle. The one thing that we watched in class was the Planet Money Makes a T-shirt. The cotton grown in Mississippi, the machines and the people in Indonesia and in Bangladesh and in Colombia, to the transportation they were making the t-shirt, to the transportation of the t-shirt on a container, to then getting it to the market where you would buy your t-shirt. That's all the steps in the supply chain or the commodity chain. These things need to be working in order. They all rely upon one another. We are interdependent. We live in a global interdependent world. And for you to think about this, if you want, take a second, take a look at where your t-shirt or your shorts or your pants are made and think about where the products were grown, right? Like what is your your shirt made of, right? Where was it grown? Who made it? Who helped process it? Who helped turn it into the t-shirt? Maybe you got a logo on there, right? Or a company, right? And then it got into your hands somehow. Just think about that for a second. The amazing, incredible world that we live in, where for the most part, like relatively cheap, if you think about all the different places and people that went into the making of the clothes that you're wearing. Commodity dependence. This is when a country is relies upon uh, one or two products for export, and it's more than 60% of a country's export. I always tell my students, what's a problem with that, right? Let's say we are dependent upon the export of oil and 90% of our exports are oil. What's a positive? Like, what's a positive of that? Well, when oil prices are high, that's probably pretty good for a country's economy. But what happens when oil prices are low? Well, that country's hit by those low oil prices. Or what if, in like in the picture here, I think this is Madagascar and vanilla. Madagascar produces the vast majority of the world's vanilla. What happens if we have an environmental disaster? What happens if the crop gets diseases and we don't have enough vanilla? How does that impact Madagascar's economy? Well, not in a very good way. Infrastructure, things that we take for granted, at least here, are things that other countries and people don't have. We need working, good infrastructure to transport our agricultural products. These things all need to be in sync. Most products still today traded internationally by sea, and in using containers, containerization. Learn about containers. Political relationships. We need to have good working relationships with other countries to ensure the global transfer of different products. This map is just taking a look at food exports and imports. This is just showing that we live in a ever globalized world where agriculture and agricultural products are being traded around the world at a higher rate than ever. Fair trade, fair wage, fair trade, fair wage, fair trade, fair wage. That's what I tell my students there. If something is marked as fair trade, that farmer is getting more money back in their pocket. The idea behind it is that it's meant to improve the lives of farmers and workers in peripheral and semi-peripheral countries. For me, let's give that farmer more money back to them. So if you see something marked as fair trade, typically I've only seen it really as coffee, but if you see something marked as fair trade, that's what it means. Coffee production and consumption. You might want to pause this and write out this prompt as if you would a FRQ, right? With an explain, you need to have an example. For me, I say you need to write 3 to 4 sentences. And for an explain the degree, you got to say to a high degree, to a low, moderate degree, and to a low degree, and then give your example. So here, coffee production, hugely interdependent between semi-periphery countries and core countries. For the most part, you see here, semi-periphery and periphery countries are the areas of the world that grow the coffee. Core countries are the main consumers of coffee, and we need these two regions, places need one another. The core countries need the semi-periphery to produce and grow the coffee. The semi-periphery needs the core to buy and consume the coffee. Topic 5.10. All right, 3 more to go. Consequences of agricultural practices. So agriculture does have positive effects, positive consequences, but there are a lot of negative consequences that can come about because of agricultural practices, and we're going to take you through that. Altering the environment. Does agriculture alter the environment? Yes, of course it does. Of course it does. These are some different ways in which it does, from shifting cultivation to slash and burn. slash and burn will lead to deforestation. Terracing is the creation of like level areas to farm, kind of like steps. I just tell my students is like going up the steps in our school or the stairs. Um, Creating of stair-like level areas to farm in hilly or mountainous areas. And I just say, hey, are we altering the environment when we're doing terrace farming? Yes, of course we are. But it's a way to increase farmland in, for the most part, areas that would be very difficult to farm. Irrigation is obviously great and wonderful, but when done unsustainably, not good, right? We can over irrigate rivers, lakes, reservoirs, seas, which would not be good. Aquifers are underground water supplies that we have. Overuse of aquifers can have negative consequences. Um, we need, it's kind of like our our extra water that we have for the future. And in drier areas in the United States, these are being overtapped. Draining of wetlands obviously would be a negative. This would be a negative consequence of agriculture. This is going to lead to a loss of biodiversity. Pastoral nomadism, if the animals overgraze, this can lead to desertification, where we see more desert-like conditions because the soil will begin to erode. More environmental consequences, pollution from chemical runoff. Chemicals can run off into clean drinking water supplies, which is not good. Soil salinization, where the salt in the water begins to build up into the soil. Salt, not good, not good for our soil. Again, desertification. This is happening in areas where it's already desert or desert-like, and this is something that we need to try and prevent. In the Sahel region in Africa, right, they're trying to build the green line, this green wall of trees to prevent desertification. Because there are some negative consequences with agriculture, we do have governments and people out there who are trying to promote conservation efforts. Typically, this has to happen at a government level for big changes to happen. One example would be debt for nature swaps. So some peripheral countries in relationship with the World Bank can reduce one's debt if they're making local investments in conservation measures. And this also happens at like a education level with farmers. For commercial farmers to reduce their air pollution from their machinery, to subsistence farmers, preventing soil erosion or the overgrazing with their pastures and their herds to reduce desertification. Societal consequences. So this is humans, right? Like, what are the consequences for humans? Well, changing diets, GMOs versus organic, right? Do we have a preference? If something is like, if there's a higher demand for organic, you're going to see that supply in grocery stores. If we as humans change our diets, you'll see that in terms of what's produced and what's grown and what's raised and how it's done. Roles of women varies tremendously across the world. In most countries, women face obstacles due to gender discrimination. We're going to talk about women in agriculture in topic 12. And again, with humans, right? As corporate agribusiness farms start to overtake small family farms, that has a human impact. People are going to be forced to leave their homes. Those rural communities are impacted. And so that is a big time societal consequence. All right, challenges of contemporary agriculture. This is topic 5.11. I don't know about you, but it seems like the second to last topic for College Board is always the most lengthy topic. It's like they throw a bunch of terms and concepts at you just at the end there, and topic 5.11 is no different. We're going to touch upon GMOs, different farming, production and consumption methods, and some of the challenges. Okay, GMOs are a type of biotechnology. Again, let's go back to the topic 5.5 with the green rev. We can produce so much more food, okay, with genetic modification. Also, humans have been genetically modifying forever. It's just the way that it's done now in a lab, more scientific, that is fairly new. We can produce way more food, but it comes with a negative environmental costs like increased machine usage, increased water usage, increased chemical usage. But it comes with some economic benefits for countries as well, like Brazil, 97% of their soybeans use biotech, which is great for their economy. GMOs are a type of biotechnology. These are just some of the things that I talk about with my class. I'm just going to kind of skip through here. Aquaculture, fish farming, aquaculture, fish farming. When it's done like this, in this picture, this is done in a more sustainable way. With aquaculture, we can produce way more fish. We can supply way more fish. And as global demand for animal protein goes up, this is obviously a huge benefit. There is a concern with this when it's done in, lakes, um, when there is native fish that are swimming around these giant nets. I'm sure you've seen this before. That can lead to runoff into those fish supplies, chemicals, some antibiotic use. For me, I liken this, the aquaculture, almost in this way, kind of like feedlot or CAFO aquaculture like this, or at the other end of the spectrum, you've got like grass fed compared to like wild caught. If you see wild caught salmon, I just teach my students wild caught salmon, kind of like grass fed beef. That's maybe an easy way to remember it. Local food movements are great for the environment, less fossil fuel emissions with local food movements. Here's a couple examples of local food movements. You might also see this called locavore movements. CSAs, community supported agriculture. It's like buying stock in a farm. You buy stock into this farm and that money is going directly into the farmer's pocket. It's a farmer that is local or relatively local, and you share in the output of the local farm. Fresh food, you know exactly where it's coming from. Sometimes they give you some options on what you get in that weekly basket, and better for the environment. Urban farms, another example of a local food movement. Urban farms are a growing movement where people are converting vacant lots, rooftops, even abandoned buildings. If you search YouTube for vertical farming, there's an example as well. Um, Another great example of a local food movement would be your local farmers market. Farmers market is great on the weekend. Go to get the locally sourced food. You might pay a little extra, but maybe it's worth it knowing where that food comes from and you're supporting the farmer directly without all the different steps in the commodity chain. Organic farming. Here you go. Next time you're at the grocery store, more expensive or less expensive? More expensive or less expensive? Typically going to be more expensive. No synthetic chemicals or fertilizers, no GMOs. Things are done organically, minimizes environmental harm. The reason why typically you'll see higher prices for organic is the inputs in the organic farm are much more labor intensive. Again, fair trade, fair wage, fair trade, fair wage, fair trade, fair wage. Value added. It's in the words. We're adding value to the product, adding value to the agricultural product. How do we add value? Turn your strawberries into strawberry jam. Turn the milk into yogurt. Turn the milk into cheese. Big time right now, eggs. Egg prices are through the roof. Pasture raised eggs. That's value added. You see pasture raised eggs, you're going to pay more for those eggs. So it's the converting of something into a different state, and the price of it is higher. The value is added. We're going back to dietary shifts, right? We as Americans, if we change our dietary patterns, you'll see those changes in the grocery store. You'll see the supply of whatever it is change. If we demand more organic, you're going to see more organic. As countries develop, as they develop economically, there is a higher demand for animal proteins. And when there's a higher demand for animal protein worldwide, you better bet that that supply of it is going to go up as well, which is why we see an ever-growing number and percentage of feedlots, those feedlots in the US, because that is a economically effective way of getting that animal up to a weight as quick as possible so then it can be slaughtered. Food insecurity. Unfortunately, we have hundreds of millions, if not over a billion people who are food insecure on a daily basis. 26% of the world's population, just look at that, 26%, over 40 million people in the US are food insecure. Why are people food insecure? There's a couple reasons. Distribution systems aren't great. Only about 55% of what we grow goes to people. Weather, severe weather is an issue. Suburbanization, make sure you know this. As the suburbs expand, what then does it encroach upon? It encroaches upon farmland. So suburbanization and the expansion of cities and suburbs is eating up productive farmland. Land being grazed was reduced by 13% from 1980 to 2018. Storage, transportation issues, those are all things that are challenges with agriculture. Poor infrastructure, which we'll more likely see in periphery and semi-periphery countries. If we can't transport the agriculture, we can't connect it to the consumer. Economies of scale, larger agricultural productions, large corporate farms, agribusinesses can produce at a reduced cost compared to a small family farm. They have more technology, more machinery, and much more efficient compared to a small family farm. And then governments. Governments play a crucial role in the supply of food, from regulations, tariffs, trade agreements, subsidies. These all factor into the foods that we have available and the price at which we can buy them. Take a look at this map and see where what world regions are suffering the greatest rates of undernourishment. And hopefully you're coming up with an answer of sub-Saharan Africa. We need to know our regions. That region is sticking out there with the most food insecurity. You might say Southwest Asia as well, some Southeast Asia, parts of South America, but sub-Saharan Africa is far and away the most food insecure region. Food deserts. We got to know our food deserts. Food deserts are typically urban areas where people lack access to a grocery store or healthy and nutritious foods. You'll have the access to the fast food, unhealthy foods, highly processed foods, but you live more than a mile. Typically don't have access to a car to get to a grocery store. It would require a long time to get to a grocery store, taking public transportation. And so food deserts are a serious thing that we need to try and combat. in the United States, as more than 23 million people in the US live in a food desert. In rural areas, it's more than 10 miles, more than 10 miles. So I try and get my students to talk about why food deserts exist, where they exist, and why. So typically it's in those poor urban neighborhoods. And I ask them, what's the goal of the grocery store? And they all say, well, to feed people. And I go, yeah, that is a goal, but it's also to make a profit. And so unfortunately, we see less grocery stores in poorer urban neighborhoods. But some cities are trying to combat this with government subsidies for grocery stores to build their business in certain neighborhoods, in lower income neighborhoods. Final topic, 5.12, women in agriculture. We see women engaged in agriculture at a very high percentage in periphery countries, in particular in West Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa. Some of these core countries, it still is a fairly high percentage, which is awesome to see. But the highest percentages you'll see are in West Africa and in Sub-Saharan Africa. Women produce 50% of the world's food and make up 43% of the labor force, which is awesome. In peripheral countries, it's mainly subsistence, growing the food just to feed their family with little to no technology. And so when you have little to no technology, you're working a large percent of the day to grow that food to feed your family. There are some discriminatory barriers that women face in some countries. And if we can fix and change these discriminatory barriers, we can, as a whole, as a people, grow and produce so much more food and feed way more people. One of the biggest issues for women is a lack of land rights. Look at this in the Congo. Women produce 75% of the food, but have no ownership rights, none. I tell my students, what do you need to farm? You need land. You need to own the land, right? You need to be able to, you own the land to farm. And in some countries, women can't even own the land. Only 10 to 20% of landowners in peripheral countries are women. We need to change this. If we change this, we can change the way that we farm and we can change, we can combat food insecurity at a higher level and we can feed more people. In some countries, right, women can't even take their crops to market. So how can we even grow and then distribute the money? And then they can't profit in it. And if you can't profit in it, you got no capital. You can't invest back into the farm. You can't invest back into technology, and you're just stuck in that one place forever. Women still throughout the world, traditionally in charge of selecting, cooking, serving the food to their families. So this would be the consumption side of women in agriculture. Again, going back to Sub-Saharan Africa here, women still do suffer discriminatory barriers that impact their ability to benefit from the labor. Some are denied access to banking, to taking out credit, which then you can't buy the new seeds, like I said. And it's hard to start then a business, or maybe even impossible to start one then and grow and make your own money. Okay, female empowerment. We can relate this to Unit 2 as well, right? We talk about female empowerment and where women are the most empowered. Typically, those fertility rates are lower. Typically, those natural increase rates are lower. And that is where women are getting married later, getting jobs, and those are, for the most part, more developed regions or core countries in the world. Empowering rural women throughout the world would increase our food supply greatly. Our Nat Geo book says 100 to 150 million people. I don't know where they get that number. Regardless of the number, that number would go up a huge amount if women are empowered, are free to make their own decisions, free to own the land, free to own the seeds, free to own the fertilizers, free to own the machinery. That's what we need to do in agriculture worldwide. And those changes need to be enacted by governments worldwide. Okay, that's it. That's Unit 5 in a nutshell. I hope you enjoyed that. And thanks for watching, and thanks for listening. Hopefully you got something positive out of this.